Okay, I'm in a storytelling mood tonight, so I'm going to tell another story. These stories are true, by the way. All these stories I'm telling, these stories are true. I know some of them sound far-fetched, and I know I might not believe them had I not lived them, but they're actually true. And the story I'm going to tell you tonight is the story of how, back in 1985, I met and got beat up by a murderer. That literally happened. I met and got beat up by a murderer. He wasn't a murderer, though, in 1985 when I met him. He was just a thug. But he ended up becoming a murderer in later years. In fact, this fella's name, and you can look this up, and you can at least confirm about the murder and everything. I can't confirm about what happened with me because the only record of that is in my memory, but this fella's name was Steve Allen. And Steve Allen was like the old talk show host, Steve Allen. Yeah, that was his name. And the person he murdered was a 15-year-old native boy by the name of Teddy Bellingham. And he beat Teddy Bellingham to death anyway in an apartment downtown in a town called Smiths Falls, which is in eastern Ontario, Canada. Like I say, you can look it up on the internet, and if you put in Steve Allen, Teddy Bellingham, and like that, Smiths Falls, Ontario, you will see it anyway there, the whole story of what happened. But that happened in the early 90s, this beating where he murdered this young boy to death. Murdered him to death. I mean, that sounds, yeah, okay. Yeah, he murdered somebody anyway, that's the bottom line. But this story that I'm talking about dates back to 1985. And what had happened was the place I was boarding at the time, I was boarding at a lady's place where her two sons went to school with me. They were friends of mine. And there was an older daughter who was on her own, and there was also a younger daughter who was younger than the two sons anyway. And one of the sons was my age, and the other one I think was maybe a year or two older, and the daughter would have been about 10 or 11. The youngest daughter, the older daughter, would have been about 20, I guess, at that time. Anyway, the older daughter, she had rented a house for the winter. And she had rented a house that belonged to a fella who owned a restaurant called the Minuteman Restaurant, which was in my hometown of Perth, Ontario, Canada, Perth, like Perth, Scotland, or Perth, Australia. It's actually named after Perth, Scotland. In fact, there's a river in Perth called the River Tay, which in Perth, Scotland, there's also a River Tay. Anyway, here's the story. This girl, this older sister of my friend's, rented this house from a fellow by the name of Tommy Mavroganis, who owned a restaurant called the Minuteman Restaurant. And he was a Greek fellow, and he decided he'd close up his restaurant for the winter. He was a hard-working man, a really good fellow, really good guy. And he decided I always had a lot of respect for Tommy. But he closed up his restaurant for the winter, and he went back to Greece just to see his family and to have a much well-earned vacation. Anyway, and he rented his house out to the older sister there from the family where I was boarding. Well, the older sister, she went away one weekend and left the keys with her brothers. So, of course, you have to have a party. Gotta have a party. You got access to a house. You can't not have a party. Come on. Like, what's wrong with you? You gotta have a party. So we had a party. And you know what happens at parties? Whenever young people in their teens have parties, I was like 17 years old at the time, 16, 17 years old. When you have a party, people show up. And they're not always people you want to show up. And they're not always, you wonder sometimes, how do they even find out about it? It's weird, but that was the case this particular night of this party. We're having a party. There's a bunch of people there. there was a girl there that I had a bit of a crush on. Nothing ever came of that either. Any of my stories about women, it'll always be nothing ever came of it. It seems that way anyway. But still, I had a crush on this girl that was there anyway, so of course I was putting my best foot forward. I wasn't acting the fool or anything. I was really being careful to be, just to at least try to present myself as a normal, sane person. So, anyway, we're having a party there. And one of the guys looks out the window and he says, "Hey, anybody here knows anybody who owns a Ford Falcon?" We're all looking at each other, no. Now back then a Ford Falcon was just an old used car, and nowadays it'd be an antique or whatever, but at that time a Ford Falcon was a $200 car. We used to buy stuff like that and just beat it down and drive it into the ground and scrap it and buy something else. We didn't care. Just old wreck of a car. That's how we looked at it. And that's pretty much how it was, too, with those things. But anyway, they were just a disposable car. And any car from that era we buy for cheap and just drive it until it dropped, And I'll tell you, I finished off a lot of old cars. I have some regrets now about that, but I really did. I used and abused a lot of old cars until they just died. But cars that I got for next to nothing, and when you get stuff for next to nothing, you don't appreciate it, and you just say, oh, well, they're a dime a dozen, which they almost were. Anyway, I go to the window and look, and sure enough, there's a 1961 Ford Falcon sitting in the driveway, and there's guys getting out of it. They're walking towards the house. These are big guys. These are guys that, these are guys you didn't want to fool around with. These were guys that could hurt you, and I knew it. We all knew it. Not that we didn't have guys at the party that could also hurt you, but these were guys that could hurt you that we didn't know. And none of us knew them, and we had no idea how they even knew there was a party there. So that kind of was concerning. Anyway, there were three of them. Steve Allen and two of his henchmen. Well, they just walked in and they opened up the door and walked in as if they owned the place. And he just made a general announcement. He says, "Hi, I'm Steve Allen from Smiths Falls." That was it, Okay, So anyway, we're kind of looking, and who the heck is this, But we didn't say too much to them. There was a bad vibe there. You could just feel there was negativity there, and, it kind of subdued everybody. So they sat down, and we're all sitting around there in the living room. And there was a joke I used to tell, and we used to call it the cat joke. Used to make everybody laugh, but in order to tell the joke, I had to contort my body into different positions and make weird faces and stuff like that. And I didn't want to tell the cat joke because, of course, the girl that I liked was there, and I didn't want to look like a fool in front of her. But what happened? Somebody yells, "Cat joke! Cat joke! Tom, you gotta tell the cat joke." I said, no, I'm not telling the cat joke tonight. No cat joke. Come on, tell the cat joke. No, not telling the cat joke. No, not going to do it. Well, Steve Allen's sitting there, and he narrowed his eyes. The eyes just turned into little slits, and he gave me a hard stare, and he says, "Tell the cat joke. I want to hear the cat joke." I said, "No, not going to tell the cat joke." And he stood up and he said, "I don't think you understand. I'm not asking you. I'm telling you. I want to hear the cat joke. You're going to tell me the cat joke." And I stood up. Foolish thing to do, by the way, but I did. I said, no, I'm not telling the cat joke. You showed up on the wrong night. I'm not telling the cat joke. Not tonight. Well, the next thing you know, I'm flying through the air in the general direction of the door with some help. Out the door I go and head first into a snowbank. And then, of course, all three of them just put the boots to me, just stomped me and kicked me and everything else. And Then they kind of left me for dead, I think. They got back in their Ford Falcon and they drove away. And that was the last I ever seen or heard of Steve Allen until the early 1990s. It must have been around 1992 or 93 or something, when it was all over the news that he had murdered this young boy, this 15-year-old boy. And that was an awful thing. It was a tragedy. This was a young native boy who had left a group home in another town and was living on the streets in Smiths Falls. And Steve Allen and his friends had befriended him. And they kind of took him under their wing, I guess. And they were letting him stay out at a campsite that Steve Allen owned. It was like a hunting camp, and there was a mobile home there. And then they lured him up into an apartment that Steve Allen rented in downtown Smiths Falls because they thought that he had stolen from them. And I don't know if he had or he hadn't, but they believed he had. And they beat him to death. And it took them hours to kill him. But they did. They beat. Steve Allen was the main one. He beat him to death. He'd beat on him until he got tired, and then he'd go rest, and then he'd go back into the bedroom and beat on him some more. And he did that until that kid was dead. And then they loaded him into the trunk of a car, and they drove him out to the hunting camp, and they buried him out there. And for a year, the kid was missing. He just fell through the cracks. It's like nobody noticed. And then one of Steve Allen's friends that had helped to dispose of the body had an attack of guilt, and he come forward and told the story. And that's how they got caught. But, yeah. Anyway, that's what happens in the world, eh? You know, lad just fell through the cracks, nobody cared. But, anyway, I'm getting kind of emotional talking about this. So I'm going to stop now. But it's kind of a funny story anyway. I guess I was lucky I only got a beating, I guess. Could have been far worse. But, yeah. Anyway, that fella, he's out now. He's no longer in prison. He got out a few years ago. So he's out on the street now again, and young Teddy Bellingham, well, he isn't. That's all. That's it. That's the story anyway. I'm sorry I got emotional here at the end, but I didn't realize I was going to get emotional like this. But it's a tough thing anyway, you know. Like I say, I met the guy and I wasn't very impressed with him anyway. I mean, Steve Allen I'm talking about, not Teddy Bellingham, Steve Allen. He was a bad dude. And I'll tell you, when him and his friends walked into that house on that winter's night in 1985, and that Saturday night in 1985, you could feel it. The energy in the room changed. We knew we were in the presence of evil. We really did. And you know, there are some people who just radiate that. And unfortunately, we met one of them. That's all. We met one of them. Anyway, that's the story. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to sign off now because I think I pretty well need to. So I'm going to do that. Anyway, talk to you all later. I hope you're having a good night. Bye-bye for now. The internet cut me off. I should mention this. I'm cut off. For some reason, the internet isn't working right now. So I have a second half to another story I'm telling that's still trying to load, but because the internet isn't working, I don't know when it will load. And same with this story here. I don't know. Of course, you won't know until it loads that I even tried to load it. But anyway, there you go. Enough of that. Good night. Talk to you later.